What's happening, everybody? Welcome to the Egality Hour. My name is Daniel Jackson, and my compadre here to my left is Mr. Reggie Perkins.
Hola.
What's up, Reggie?
Hello.
Hey, man. The Egality Hour, what we talk about here is this is going to be a podcast that's dedicated to us actually discussing a lot of the issues, the larger concerns with not only the community here, but really it's going to be the community at large, because there's a lot of issues out there that are going on, and right now we got an upcoming election, general election, November the 8th. Midterm elections, man. There's a lot of people out here, especially in Augusta, Georgia, where we mainly trying to make a difference, where there's a lot of people who aren't voting. And the vote seems like it's a small thing, but the whole purpose of this series of podcasts is for us to actually discuss exactly why the vote will be so important towards changing things in the future. Yeah, for us, your vote is your voice. So without your vote, you don't have a voice, right? But you also have a choice. So with that, in this upcoming election, we have Democrats versus Republicans, a two-party system. Everybody looks at the highlights, but for us doing this podcast, we want to really get down to the nitty-gritty of your choice. Yeah, so with that, the small print, that's why we are doing the show. We want to make sure that everybody fully understands their choice. They fully understand that, hey, I have certain interests that need to be represented. And in order for you to actually get those things properly represented, you actually need to...
Yeah, you need to know how to enforce your will upon your politician.
Exactly, leaning on those representatives. And here in the state of Georgia, we have a number of races in the general upcoming election that we really need to highlight.
You said we got a number of racists. Or racist.
Oh, well, that is a good one. You're right, man. So we have a number of... Hey.
That is a good question.
That's a good question. Well, this one is RACES. There are a number of races. Key races here in the good old state of Georgia. And to be honest with you, the funny thing is, we always go back and we talk about, I think I talked to a young lady the other day. She said, man, I really dislike the president of the United States right now. But the funny thing about voting is you vote up and down the ticket, right? So what we mean by up and down the ticket, we're talking about like right now in the state of Georgia, in the upcoming election, November 8th, you got
multiple positions, not just senator, not just governor. Mm-hmm. You got tax collector. You have a whole number of titles that most people aren't even familiar with.
Look, we do have a lot of key races, and I don't want to brush over these key races because a lot of times I think that, especially like I said, the young lady I talked to, she talked about the President of the United States. The President of the United States has some power, right? Because he's in the executive branch?
The President has a title. Yeah,
but we talk about these different branches within the United States, and we act as if we don't have the same kind of dynamic within the state of Georgia, right?
Yeah. So federal, state, it mirrors itself.
Yeah. So
state mirrors federal.
Exactly. So you have some executive races that's going on, right? The governor. You have some stuff that's going to be legislative in nature. Right, there's a lot of different people who are going to be able to impact legislation directly that are going to be running.
People need to understand what legislation is. Legislation are the brand new laws, things created that either tell you you're going to get this amount or your kids are going to get this amount of time. This is legislation, man. People sit down and craft out laws that affect you, whether or not you believe it, kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Legislation exists. Most people think legislation is a myth. It's not. It really exists.
Right.
That shit really hurts people. Or it helps.
But let's go deeper into that though. You're talking about legislation. Legislation it's developed, right? It's a concept that somebody brings up to say, hey, right, a representative from your community that you have selected during your vote, this person goes and they say, hey, I want to introduce a bill. Or I want to introduce a new rule to the local House representatives in Georgia, or if your representative you're selecting is going to be representing you at the United States House of Representatives, they introduce legislation. And that legislation says, hey, we think this should take place. So whatever your community of interest is, whether it be you're African American, you're Asian, you're LGBTQ, hey,
you remember, you are affected to trust. Everybody gets affected.
There are many communities out here that need to be represented, and they are not represented. I can't remember the name. Oh, Superintendent of Schools for Georgia. That is.
That is a very important position. People don't pay attention to this position because it seems like, well, school is school. No, school is not school. You pay attention to what's going on in Florida right now, then you'll understand just why significant this position is. Right now in Florida, they are not teaching black history. whatsoever. And it's been put through legislation. People went down, crafted some stuff and said, yeah, this is unacceptable for our kids. You look at the platform right now, you showed it on your phone. It says, yeah, the right for a parent to choose.
Yeah.
If that parent has not been educated in child rearing through some form of college, that parent doesn't need to choose. The person, the educator who's actually going through the training that understands how to teach a child, what to teach a child, when to teach a child. But even that's a different
Well, yeah, I'm going to have to play devil's advocate on that one, play the other side of the fence, because I think one of the biggest problems that we have in the school system is that a lot of the times we put too much faith in the educators, right? Because the educators, even though they are paid to educate our children, a lot of the times the education is so disconnected from what we actually want from the household that we have two different messages going to those children. So a lot of the problems that we have, especially just think about police, right? When they say, hey, sometimes it ends up bad when you have people within communities that aren't from those communities, policing those communities. It turns around to be the same thing with education. A lot of times, if you don't fully understand that community you're coming from, it's kind of hard for you to deliver a message, an effective message to those children in the education line. So with America, school choice, I see, and just to be totally transparent, public choice is on a Republican platform.
I was about to.
I was
about to point that out.
This is a nonpartisan show.
I was about to point that out.
I want to put that out there. I wouldn't say this is a nonpartisan show. You're going to see people from both sides of the aisle on the show, but I have a very nonpartisan view, and I just want to highlight that fact that Republicans are very for public choice, pro-choice.
Yeah, public choice because they can afford to choose where their children go.
Yeah. So going back to Democrats lean more heavily towards utilizing the government to ensure that all people have a certain standard for education. So that's the big difference. If you really want to dig down into it, the Democrats on education, they want to utilize the government to push an equal level across the nation, where there's a set standard across the board for all education.
But yeah, not to cut you off, but this is something we spoke on before, highlighting the difference between utilize the government. Those are the key words when you deal with a liberal or a Democrat anyway. They want to utilize the government. Whether you see that pro or con, that's on you. Conservatives, more so, they want you to rely upon yourself. They want that self-individualism, rugged individualism. You know, we make this for our family. That's one of the differences.
Well, let's tap into that more though, because once again, we want this podcast to not only be informative, but we want it to be educational. So when we start talking about conservative,
keep shit the same.
Being here in Georgia, I just want to break it down very simple. Because when you start talking about what conservative means versus progressive, conservative means we are very conservative. We want to keep things the same. The old school way is still needs
everything that was will be.
All right, and when you start talking about progressives, if you don't like the way things are right now, people who are progressive are trying to change things. No matter now, you can argue, like he said, whether it's for the better or for the worse, but they are trying to change things. So if you are for change, usually you're on this side.
They're talking about changing things, but that's a different show. That in itself is a different
slippery slope. But it goes back to your vote, though, right? So everything you're talking about goes back to your vote, and we got a lot of different ideas that I think we toss around about how we can actually make a difference from a voting perspective. But the number one way you can make a difference is just by voting.
You have to participate. Just shut up.
Exactly. And now, to that point, I definitely have to highlight this. One of the big reasons why me and my man Reggie, we've been so involved in trying to inform people and educate people out here in Georgia these days, because we got the news, and it's not funny, but I laugh at it because of how crazy this situation is in a city which Augusta is. Actually, this got overtook recently by Columbus as the second largest city. So Columbus is now the second largest city by like 5,000 people. But from a metropolitan standpoint, Augusta, Georgia is still the second largest metropolitan area in Georgia. Now, to that point, we just had an election back in May. It was midterms back in May. And less than 20% of the electorate voted. And there were certain things like judgeships It was the mayor.
Very important positions.
The mayoral office on the line.
The mayor slid in.
Yeah. So that's what we're talking about. So at the end of the day, right now, if you are not participating, if you have certain interests, you're from a certain community and you're mad about something because maybe education isn't right here in the state of Georgia, maybe healthcare, maybe you not getting good healthcare, maybe you feel as if you're being oppressed in your community. If you don't vote, then you don't matter, right? Not from a politics perspective, because politics is the Greek word meaning affairs of the city. So you're not participating in the affairs of the city because you aren't voting, you aren't utilizing your voice. That's just the way I see it.
And I say certain things that sound aggressive when it comes to people who don't vote, like you don't matter, whatever. But the thing is, honestly, most of them don't even understand it's a problem. Most of them don't realize that voting is something that is significant to them, their kids, because once again, they don't understand, yeah, this person looks woo, but he's literally introducing a law that will affect your grandchild.
Yeah.
How? We don't know. But if you care about your family, it doesn't even have to be you. We always worried about the immediate gratification, the immediate reward. Voting, for the most part, it's essentially for the future, because everything that gets put into legislation doesn't usually happen immediately.
Right.
It's a down the line thing.
Right.
That's how they slip it in on you. And if you're not paying attention, you're not voting, you're pretty much setting your kids and your grandkids up for failure. Now, if you don't care about yourself, that's cool.
Yeah.
But you had them damn kids.
Yeah.
It's your responsibility to make sure that they're okay.
Right.
So you need to pay the fuck attention.
Because that's a big point, man. Talking about things that happen in the future, because you're right. A lot of times we are trapped here in the present, right? But you start talking about issues like what we just saw across the country, everything that just took place with the abortion rights, right? You start talking about things like climate change. There's a lot of things that will continue to impact not just us in this current time.
Or the wall.
Or the wall. Look,
Or the wall.
Or the wall. So, look, this is the funny thing. Once again, I got to go back to this. You're going to get this from me and Reggie all day, every day. We are not one-sided in this discussion. Yeah, we are not one-sided in this discussion. But we try to bring facts, and we try to bring, once again, education to those that may not know that there's a big deal about to happen on November 8th. You have Democrat and Republican, but you have so many different extremes within those parties. So yes, you have certain people that talk about extremes like, yeah, we want to take all your guns. That does not represent the entirety of the Democratic Party.
Close.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm saying. For us to talk about the platform, their unified platform, this is everybody that's within the Democratic Party, no matter if they're LGBTQ, no matter if they're black, no matter, whoever identifies in that group, they say, hey, we're all aligned under this Democratic Party platform. And what they say is we will enact universal background checks and online sales of guns and ammunition, ban the manufacture and sale of assault weapons. Democrats believe the gun companies should be held responsible for their products and will prioritize repealing the law that shields gun manufacturers from civil liability.
How do you hold a gun manufacturer accountable?
Once again, vote. And for me, being a soldier for 20 years, I know there's a need to carry a gun. Right? I believe in the Second Amendment and having protection.
How do you know America is America, man? They shut up kindergarten. Kids, babies.
True.
That was the moment to have that change. That moment of, this is ridiculous. We talked about it as a country. Everybody said this needs to happen, but necessity didn't turn into action.
Yeah, and I'm glad we bring these points up, because I'm always going to bring this back to the vote. So we talk about powerful moments in history that have taken place where you had huge responses, whether it was the George Floyd murder, or we talk about the abortion rights being stripped federally. There are always big things like this, where people go out and they protest, but they don't go vote.
Yeah,
so we start.
Go ahead.
No,
Because I just got this thing about protests. Go ahead, I'm going to let you finish though.
Yeah. my point always goes back to the simple fact of when you say, hey, well, voting's not going to change anything. That's the point. When they vote, they also have to vote and hold people accountable, because you have representatives that can change those things. Oh, well, we're trying to get legislation passed to stop assault guns. The only reason that you can't get assault rifles banned is because of the NRA. The NRA has a lot of money.
The biggest lobbies, that's the biggest lobbying group ever.
And that is the hold up to all legislation. It's not just, you have community groups of interest, you have lobbyists, as you just said, that put messages out there that distort the truth. And the truth being that there are a lot of shootings going on. unnecessary shootings. I mean, you look at countries like Japan. They don't have a lot of shootings because they took everybody's guns away. Now you can debate whether that's good or not. They took a lot
effective.
It's effective.
Effective and good are two different things.
Right, but to that point, there's always going to be different perspectives on it. But you don't have a perspective if you don't vote, right? And so that's our biggest problem. We love to get angry and go do everything except for participate.
Yeah, do something that can actually change what you're complaining about.
Participate in the game, because the game is politics. The game is democracy, right? You have to pick a side, and it's sad because you'd be like, oh, well, if Republicans and Democrats, I don't like either party. Well, you know, you're right. Yeah. Both sides, they have questionable.
Nothing is 100% perfect, though, man. Nothing is just absolutely good or absolutely bad. You have to take the good and the bad. You have to weigh that shit out. Make a decision where you land and do something. Don't just talk. Go do something. Or else I don't want to hear you talk.
Well, let's lean into the Second Amendment, though, because I want to go further into the local high school tailgate shootings. Because with Laney High School, which Laney Walker is a historic high school in downtown Augusta, Georgia. You have Laney, but you also have T.W. Josie. Both of those events, their tailgates that they have that's associated with their homecoming events, there was gunshots. So the T.W. Josie game, they had gunshots after the game, if I remember correctly, and then the Laney game was actually interrupted by gunshots. So both of those events were shut down. And if anybody knows anything about the city of Augusta, Georgia, homecoming is everything out here, right? You got classes from way back in the 70s, right? School classes where
super alumni.
Yeah, super alumni. They come out there to support. So talking about the Second Amendment, talking about how this country was really built on that, right? You talk about the militias and the gun rights and, hey, the right to bear arms. It's hard to take that tradition away, right? So you start talking about conservatism. We are in the home of conservatism. And a lot of times, I mean, the NRA, that money that comes in, it's not going to be that the people don't want to change things. It's just when you get a message that doesn't tell you the effective way to change things, which is voting, holding people accountable. You might get a message to say, hey, you should be upset about it and go protest. And that's what I was saying. I know you want to chime in on protesting. Because I look at protesting as being ineffective. That's just my personal stance.
To say the least.
But I believe that voting is the most effective way in holding your elected representatives accountable. So the biggest issue right now that we're having in Augusta, just recently, with SB 202, is you're trying to make it harder for people to be able to access those voting rights. And so all that ties back into the what do they call it? They call it suppressing the vote.
Yeah.
Right.
Voter suppression.
The voter suppression.
101.
Out here, it's in plain day, but enough people aren't participating, so enough people aren't able to influence
it's not called voter suppression out here.
It's called following the rules.
Yeah, that's called, a bunch of numerous different names.
We change, but it's changing the rules though, and that's the problem, right? So it depending upon what side you're on out here in the great state of Georgia, you might look at it and say, well, hey, why are they purging voters, right? And when I say purging voters, why are they removing voters from the roll that have already been there, right?
Let's say, how are they purging voters?
Or how, right?
Just why? How are they purging voters?
Look, everybody is for fair and free elections. Now, the way they bring about fair and free elections, that's the question mark.
And the way you define fair and free. Once again, it's all in the language.
Yeah.
Define it.
Yeah, but for us, I want to hit the big ticket item, which is this election upcoming. Georgia is a major swing state. A major swing state. So you start talking about national policy. National policy is connected directly to local policy. So for anybody out there that's listening to this that thinks that your local Democratic representatives are not connected at the hip on what the National Democratic Party is saying, then you are lost in the sauce. So to that point, if you want to affect something education-wise locally, if you think your school is not doing everything they're supposed to do locally, you may want to really consider voting up and down the ticket. And what I mean by that is voting from the local politicians that claim that they're going to do something in accordance with their platform, and then also voting for the national politicians that claim that they're going to do something for your interests and your party that's in accordance with their platform. Once again, that's half the deal. Voting is half the deal. Showing up and voting is half the deal. And then the other part is holding those elected officials accountable. Because once they get in there, there's nothing that says that they can't change their mind, right? Because if you look at the platforms, there's a lot of stuff on there. And if anybody knows anything about the House of Representatives and the Senate, that's like a branch of the United States of America. They don't work well together. No.
They don't work.
They don't work. Oh, no, I said work well together. He's talking about they don't work at all.
No, I mean literally, they do not work. They sit there, talk, discuss, postpone, delay until their salary comes up for a vote. Then it's an immediate top to bottom vote, man. That's when you get bipartisanship. That's the one time you get that stuff.
That stuff.
When their money's on the line. But when it comes to relief, aid, funding certain, I don't know, activities that benefit people of color, then it's, well, we don't want to spend that much, or you know, we don't want to overspend, or we don't want to look like we're favoring one race over another.
But how do they get away with that? And you know
they get away with it because they're in the positions of power. We put them there and we don't hold them accountable because we just put people we don't know up there because based on how they look, what they say as opposed to what they do. I don't care about what you say. I pay attention to what you do. Most people don't. We get, like, as you say, lost in the sauce. Oh, he said he's going to da-da-da-da-da. Oh, $1,500. You know, they're going to give us ooh. No, that's, for one, it's not beneficial. It's not helpful. And it's a long-term problem as opposed to a short-term, like, solution. But, I'm just listening.
No, that's what I'm saying. So, the point being holding people accountable, though, right? So representation matters, but it only matters if you can actually hold that person accountable. Because, look, I'm the first person, when people say, man, voting doesn't work, you know what, it doesn't work. Absolutely, when 20% of Augusta shows out to actually vote for somebody, you're absolutely right. That does not work, because it does not represent the will of the people. We talked about that at the national elections, where it's just like, hey, man, well, if you got the popular vote, voted this particular president in, right? And then that person still loses even though they won the popular vote, right? So we have a system that's made a certain way.
The system is divisive. The system in itself breeds anger because how is it over half the country voted for somebody and yet they still lost? I don't care which side it is. I'm just saying the system in itself causes conflict within people because they're like, well, hell, that number's bigger than that number, but he lost.
Because the people don't fully know the rules. And that's what this is about, right? Like, at the end of the day, an informed voter is an effective voter, right? Because if you just go in there and you vote off a name, guess what? You're going to keep your people, when I say your people, whatever community of interest you come from, you're going to keep those people in the same conditions because you did not do your research, you didn't, do your due diligence to figure out exactly what these team of Democrats offering? What were these team of Republicans offering, right? Because they all offer something.
Also, people need to understand what your actual interest is. Most people don't even know how to identify and then voice their interest. Half of us hear things, say, oh, that doesn't affect me, so I don't care. It does. It may not affect you directly, but it affects you. It will either enhance or take away from your interest. Somehow, some way, I don't know how, I'm not here to say I have a solution, but somehow people need to be educated on exactly what your interest is and how do you protect it and how you get it addressed. And I know voting is one way, but like you said, you can't just vote. You don't just vote blue or red. You vote your interest. That's what people who are informed they do. They vote their interest.
Right.
And no matter what color you, if I have a business and you're red, and you're making sure my kids aren't going to starve, you're not going to take, 60% of my profit? Okay, red it is.
Right, and let me dig in on that because we talked about this before, but I want to really dig into your interest because your interest, and this is crazy, this is why people get tripped up between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Your interest, you may have one interest in their entire platform.
Yeah.
Which we just talked about gun rights earlier.
Point.
You may actually just want to keep your guns.
Everything else.
You may be like, man, I want to keep my guns. But your biggest problem is going to be the rest of that party may have some other extreme things that you may not, but you may not even know about it. And you've associated yourself with that party.
That's why you research before you involve or commit to anything. You don't just commit to a vote because you want to vote. You don't just commit to a party because you like the color. You research. You pay attention to the shit you're getting yourself involved in. Because if you don't, you're setting yourself up for failure. A lot of us do that in a lot of other areas in life. this is one area you can't afford to do that.